This presentation is on education policy and school reform, politics, economics, and ethics. Here, Noddings is asking us about the meaning of equality. Is equality sameness? Is it fairness, which is better described with the term equity? All men are created equal, which means a right to equal treatment before the law, even though we know that human beings are created in a wide variety of sizes, shapes, abilities, and then experiences adds to that difference. Are students equally capable of learning what our schools require of them? Children have very different talents and interests, so the only reasonable answer is no. So should we design curricula for different capacities? In the past, we've done this and called it tracking, and we've put kids into tracks according to their ability or interest. In some places, that's still happening to some degree, but we gave up on that thinking that knowing that we were assigning people to ability tracks based on socioeconomic status, so on our assumptions about them. There's also some social selection among groups of people that would prevent them from selecting a track category where they would be away from their friends, which are usually the people they grew up against. So push-pull factors that maintain tracking as a way to reproduce social groups. Any child should be able to select an academic, vocational, or commercial course, but no one track should hold a disproportionate number of children from any one group. Should we require all children to take the same college prep curriculum? This is the prevailing thought today, that this is what equality of education means, especially when we value a college prep curriculum over other curriculum that wouldn't necessarily make kids ready for college. But when we force children to take exactly the same courses, we are likely to increase, not decrease, their differences. When all kids take the same curriculum and not all kids have the same interests or abilities, someone is going to do poorly. So when we talk about equal education, we should think about several things. Equal opportunities could mean equal access. We've done a good job of making sure that all students have access to education, but do they have access to the same kinds of educational programs? We know that's not true. Equal treatment, are all students treated the same? Do they have access to the same programs and courses within schools? Do they have access to the same facilities and resources in schools? We know that that's not happening. And then equal outcomes. Should we expect all students to have the same outcomes? It's reasonable to expect similar outcomes overall for students. For example, literacy and numeracy. Exceptions, special education students and English language learners should, by default, have different educational outcomes. In one case, English language learners should be working to learn English and in most cases retain their home language, as well as meeting academic goals, and special education students need different goals entirely in some cases. Problems with simply demanding equal outcomes leads to this idea of no excuses, meaning we should see the same outcomes for all kids, no matter their differences, their needs, or their interests. And the policy of no excuses says that teachers are at fault when kids don't experience equality, meaning the same outcomes. And here, Noddings is taking on the standards. Democratically essential that minimum standards be achieved by almost all students, which is a reasonable and sincere effort. So all children can learn, but what can they learn? This is what Notting asks. Under what circumstances can they learn? To what degree? As demonstrated how? And why should children learn X? This is something that bugs me as well. One of the dispositions for our teacher education students is that they believe that all children can learn. But all that does is offer an empty platitude that adds up to meaning nothing. I think behind it is that they want teacher education students who don't have negative stereotypes about the abilities of poor and minority students, but there really needs to be more to this. The second point here is that closing the achievement gap concentrates on performance on tests of just 2 subjects, which impoverishes the curriculum. More appropriately, we might focus on the opportunities gap. More on the standards. The standards movement is explained very well by Diane Ravitch, educational historian, and here you have a hyperlink to a video where Diane is talking about the standards movement, and in particular Common Core state standards. These are a set of standards as a model curriculum, and by definition that's impoverished when you have just one curriculum for all students. Here's the alternative view of having the same curriculum. Curriculum materials should be comprehensive and richly varied. Students should select and master different subsets of material. The available curriculum should be far more extensive than the material mastered by any one student or group of students. Continuing with standards, Notting asks, what should all students learn if there should be some common learning? In which she is questioning. Is it algebra? This has been a subject that people who advocate for a college prep curriculum for all students hold up as a prize. They imagine or they examine the amount of algebra and the number of classes and how young people are when they first encounter algebra as a marker for academic advantage in math and all of college. But Notting's, being a former math teacher herself, asks, does everyone really need algebra? And shouldn't there be different standards for those who will use it in their work from those who will use it just to understand mathematical reasoning? What should all students learn? Well, reading and writing, especially as mediated from electronic devices now. This is still the way that we access information. We should also probably learn how to critically evaluate visual media and audio visual media as well, and to produce it. This is what Notting fears. Teachers will hold low expectations for poor and minority students. And well, this is what Notting's represents as one of the barriers to offering different curricula material for students. Out-of-school factors. Can schools alone provide equal opportunity? We know that poverty complicates academic achievement because it introduces stresses as well as deprivation. People in poverty have fewer resources to give to their kids in the form of food, extra tutoring. Kids in poverty don't get the same quality sleep. They don't have the same quality health care. So housing, healthcare, nutrition, pollution, safety, enrichment, these are all differences that are between kids who are resourced appropriately and kids living in poverty. We know from the work of David Berliner that school effects only account for about 20 to 40% of academic achievement. Out-of-school factors account for most of it. So what outcomes do we have in mind that should be equalized? Should everyone have access to an Ivy League college? The idea of accountability, which is the focus, preoccupation, or fetish of the post No Child Left Behind era. No Child Left Behind in 2001 was the culmination of this idea of business-like accountability applied to schools. Even though we're beyond No Child Left Behind, we're in the era of the Every Student Succeeds Act, we still have this hangover. We've been brainwashed more or less to think about school accountability as teachers and schools being responsible for making sure that kids meet some kind of level of achievement as measured on standardized assessments. So Notting asks, accountability for what and to whom? This is business language, which means accountable to shareholders to create profit and minimize losses. That can't be a word that makes sense when we're talking about teachers and schools and students. Accountability has to do with rate of return on investments. Unfortunately, we do talk about rate of return in investments in education. We want to see that we're getting something from our money. And we don't have good measures for evaluating the influence of education on society when we're taking a look just on standardized test scores. We have models from this country and outside of the country that suggest that for every dollar spent on education, we get at least a $3 to $5 return on social stability, on fewer dollars spent for prisons and the criminal justice system, on better reduced healthcare costs because education is associated with better health and better decision making. The aims of education could be, as opposed to accountability, the growth of individuals, socialization into democratic life. But the current law, the proficiency of every student on certain standardized tests, is the aim of education. But why should we achieve this? Or how should we achieve this? Nottings and others prefer the term responsibility. We are accountable to supervisors, which includes compliance and draws our attention to outputs. But we are responsible to those below us, those in our care. Responsibility forces us to think about what is best for our students. It draws our attention to inputs. It encourages caring relationships between teachers and students. And finally, more on the use of testing. Accountability points us toward testing as a means of showing authorities that we have accomplished what was expected of us. We are inclined to dismiss aims that are not easily testable. And you can see this in what it's done to students who have been through the No Child Left Behind era, who are preoccupied with whether or not something is on the test. Equality demands that everyone take the same tests, but we've already puzzled that one out to see the irrationality of giving everyone the same kinds of tests. Using this language, the whole process of schooling becomes standardized. The problem does not lie with the tests themselves, although they have been challenged as biased and some are not valid, meaning accurate in measuring their intended bit of learning. The problem is using the test only to get a score and linking the score to high stakes. And some of these include the promotion of students from grade to grade, the evaluation of teachers, teacher pay, administrative jobs, and school survival.